Hello, good
Yeah,
evening,
madam.
everybody. It is my honor to introduce Ms. Meena Lal for this session on data protection law in India, past, present, and future. Ms. Meena Lal is the moderator of this session. She delights in being addressed as a student of law, a sentiment I relate to. She firmly believes that the journey of learning law is more joyful than being just referred to as experienced. She is a gold medalist in LLB from Jabalpur University, and she started her career as a practicing advocate in the High Court of Madhya Pradesh at its principal bench at Jabalpur. Later, she joined Tata Steel Limited as in house counsel, where she has been at the helm since 2008 in her current designation as Chief Legal Officer, Industrial and Litigation. Ms. Lal has handled litigation in diverse fields, including criminal, land, mining, environment, forest, labor, to name a few. She is skilled in the field of contracts of several kinds, dispute resolution, and has also been a director on several boards. Continuing her learning streak during the academic year 2019-2020, she enrolled for the postgraduate diploma in cyber law and cyber forensics, which she has cleared recently. She has been recognized by BW Law as one of the top 100 general counsels of India for the year 2020-2021. Ms. Lal believes that knowledge increases manifold by sharing and has held several awareness sessions on diverse streams of law and has contributed to volume 8 of a book series written by Mr. Samara Aditya Pal titled Constitution of India, Its Origins and Evolution. I request Ms. Meena Lal to take this session forward.
Thank you, Ruchika. And by the way, for all the participants, Ruchika and I have been batchmates in cyber law and cyber forensic in NLSIU. Thank you, Ruchika, once again for introducing me to the participants. And good evening once again to all the participants, and welcome to session 3 of day 1 of Virtual Indian Data Protection Summit 2021. Let me at the beginning introduce to you all the esteemed panel that we have for this session. I hope the video of everybody is on. I can see everybody. Dr. Mahendra Limaye, advocate from Nagpur, who is a techno-legal expert in cybersecurity and cyber legal education. He is originally a mechanical engineer, but decided to change track in his career discipline. He is to holding not only a diploma, but a PhD in cyber law from Nagpur University. He's FDPPI certified data privacy consultant. He is a guest faculty for cyber laws and cybersecurity for various educational as well as government training organizations. His views on cyber laws and cybersecurity are regularly published in various newspapers. Dr. Limaye has provided cyber legal consultations to more than 20,000 persons across India through his unique venture titled Cybercrime Helpline, and also provided monetary relief to various cyber fraud victims till date. His practice coverage is before the district courts and the high courts. Then we have Mr. M.G. Kodandaram, who we fondly refer as MG Sir, an advocate and consultant from Bangalore, who is a former assistant director of Customs and Central Excise. He has worked in all important formations of Customs, Central Excise, Service Tax, CESTAT, anti-smuggling, etc., and many other units. He has also served in Sahara International Airport at Mumbai as Air India Air Intelligence Officer. A passionate teacher, Mr. Kodandaram has trained thousands of officers in departments on taxation laws, excise, customs and service tax, foreign trade policy, IPR, RTI, GST, to name just a few. And the list is long, and of course, cyber forensics, not to forget. He is an active member of the faculty at NASIN and many training academies. Thirdly, on the panel, we have Wing Commander Mr. S.K. Prakash. He is a lead senior counsel, Cisco, from Bangalore, an experienced legal professional with 16 years of experience as government legal officer. He has also been working in the private sector since the last 12 years, leading the corporate legal matters in the fields in the areas of contracts, litigation, etc. Has hands-on experience on employment and labor laws, Companies Act, and its related compliances, telecom policies for service provider and other service provider segments. Mr. Manoj Karn is our another esteemed panelist here. Mr. Manoj Karn is CIO, Prudent Insurance Brokers Private Limited, a digital transformation leader with over 18 years of experience in operations, data management, risk and security, claims and IT management within the insurance sector. Manoj is Master's in Business Administration in Banking and Insurance and an Associate of Insurance Institute of India, New Delhi, that is called AIII, and holds relevant certifications such as Certified in Governance of Enterprise IT from ISACA, USA, ISO 27001, etc. As the CIO of Prudent, his visionary ability and goal-oriented behavior has enabled the organization to quickly convert business requirements into solution offerings. So all of you all guests, it's my extreme privilege to have introduced all of you, and it would be my indeed a moment of delight, a session of delight for me personally to be moderating the session. Let me, friends, first of all, take you to what the session is going to deal with. The session deals with data protection law in India, past, present, and future. Very much though, just now, as we heard Justice Sri Krishna, he wants to say that whatever he has recommended has become the past because something new is in the offing. So the past, present, and future in the space of data protection is very, very dynamic. We, that is this panel, shall really discuss the past, present, and future of data protection law in India, as we can understand. Now, why do we not need to talk about privacy? Justice Sri Krishna referred to privacy. Srinivas also referred to privacy. It's because we want liberty. As Srinivas said, that we must have the anonymity. So let me begin with some thoughts on liberty. The idea of liberty is actually quite complex. The most basic understanding of the expression is the freedom of an individual to do with what he or she pleases to do. As per a Latin maxim, libertas omnibus favoritimmonst, liberty is the most favored than all things. Let's change the concept now to privacy. Privacy is an undefinable concept, yet an inalienable human right. In my humble expression, privacy is a concept and not an element that's capable of being defined. The certain, definite, and crystallized legal definition of the concept of privacy is not available in any statute. Now, MJ Soy, let me first come to you. In his address, Justice Sri Krishna referred to a certain judgments of Supreme Court, the highlights being a few celebrated cases that he talked about. He didn't have much time, so he touched upon the names, that is Maneka Gandhi. Certain cases referred to hospitals that had to deal with privacy, etc. In 2018, while rendering the judgment in case Puttaswamy 2, we're talking of case Puttaswamy 2, the majority judgment opens by a quote which reads that it is better to be unique than the best, because being the best makes you the number one, but being unique makes you the only one. Mr. Kodandaram, in your highly experienced career, you have come across various interpretations of the Constitution of India, laying an emphasis on the need for right to life, liberty, and privacy of an individual. Could you please share with us how the right to privacy has evolved through some of the very celebrated judicial pronouncements? Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Meenaji. Sarva Gurubhyo Namaha. Earlier in the days of yore, there was a term, Sarva Tantra Swatantra. That's the liberty. It is not something new to Indian culture. In fact, when I wanted to talk more on Constitution, I thought, let me get into, because people asked me, sir, what is this privacy you are struggling today as though you're in a trouble? All of a sudden, something new. Are we not living for generations? Was there not privacy? What is the difference you have? Actually, Constitution is nothing but an answer to the aspirations of our people. We, the people of ourselves, of India, give to ourselves. So it's an aspirational aspect. Constitution should have what we aspire, whether we have aspired for it. Then you look in, people ask me why privacy is struggled. Now you are struggling for privacy restoration. Was not privacy. When you look into the historical developments a bit, you are in the age where communication was a tough ask. In the case, if something about somebody else has to reach somebody else, it has to be by means of a runner, or within the town, they will talk to each other, or that was the only communication. Later on, as scientifically we developed, the communication became faster. We invented the printing machines where we could print and circulate and have it in the library, what was referred to by our Krishna ji, where it was there earlier. So there, was possible. Their information was little faster, little brisker. As we industrialized, we went out for a printing machine. Later on, telephone came. Now, information of an individual was available intact in the earlier age also. Individual's liberty was there as far as his private matters are concerned, personal matters are concerned, because it depends upon his liberty whether he wants to tell something or not. It is his prerogative to preserve certain things, and he should not be allowed to be abused by others. But you look into this present age, communication increased, then electronic joint hands, we have ICT, information communication. This information joining with the communication and electronics became so fast. Today, if somebody wants to know about my personal matters, if you imagine 100 years ago and today, it can be done in no time, without any expenditure, without any struggle. Means I'm in the midst of a struggle, midst of a place where I am not able to keep my privacy at all. I cannot keep my reputation. I cannot keep my personal information. I cannot be prevented from abuse. Who is responsible for all this? When you look in, the people do ask me, sir, why fundamental right was there, Article 21. Even now it is there, same words, but why you are implying privacy? Because privacy was not that concerned, because the information was not moved fast. The information was very difficult to reach people, and therefore the abuse was minimal. As we have digitalized, we have gone to e-governance in all aspects of our life. Now, if somebody wants to make me irreputable person, he can do it without spending a minute. Who has created it? Now you can understand the human being is in the midst of a storm. The storm is being created by the digital society or cyber society, or the people who are heading that thing. Even when it was created, it was handled by only a section of people. Now everybody is using for everything. And therefore, we are in such a storm, we are required to protect ourselves with the maximum articulation of law. Otherwise, it is impossible. Why this is more dangerous is the creators of this technology themselves are not able to control, because they have their own commercial interests. And people who abuse, they have much more interest. So now we are in a storm where our liberty is being totally hampered. The law, which should have grown along with the technology, has been crippled. We have not at all grown as far as law is concerned. In fact, when you compare it to the other laws in other countries, we are far behind. Even today, even after Puttaswamy judgment, we are unable to bring any law. Some people will say, sir, IT law was there from 2000. What you are talking? This is another question people do ask. I tell them it was there. There was an adjudication measure which has totally failed. Tribunalization has not at all delivered. Only in the books it is there as on today, as far as privacy is concerned. So let me look into, prior to the judgments, the names I will circulate later. Let me not struggle with those names. Their Supreme Court was stressing on liberty of individuals, but it did not heighten it to call it as a fundamental right for the reason it was under some control. It was possible. As time goes, now it went to such a kind of a storming situation where the creators themselves, they're saying, no, we are helpless. We are helpless to bring this down. We can't stop abusing. So there is need of a law which should be done so that the liberty is there. That's why that Aadhaar, when it took, it upgraded ourselves into section Article 21, where they said it is inevitable in this cyber society, which is newly formed virtual society, where anything anywhere can go without any hassle, without anything, keeping anonymous or keeping privacy as a kind of liberty aspect. It is becoming very, very difficult. So therefore, depending upon the changed situation, the aspirations in the constitution should be redefined, and therefore rightly so. Though the earlier to Puttaswamy judgments were not given the grade of fundamental right, they have given in Puttaswamy judgment, looking into the storm that is brewing, it is impossible unless it is made into a fundamental right. Because fundamental rights alone can give you immediate remedy under Article 32 or 226. Even today, despite there is no specific law, unless there is a specific law to have enforcement of this, it is not possible. We have seen, even though the law is there, it has been totally crippled because there is no separate agency which is mandated. So looking into this situation, historical development, technological development, societal development, governing methodology, administration, and the exploitation by the commercial organizations and the abusers. Even in a small village, an illiterate man is abusing my information to make fishing, which is also a criminal offense. This is the situation, and therefore, rightly, constitutionally, it has become a valid argument to make it into right to life. For my living, I need to be kept out of this storm. And at least if I'm in the storm, my consent should be taken. I must be ready to expose certain things which I like. I should have the liberty. And therefore, I am the principal. Yes, rightly put that word in the PDPP bill. I am the principal. I should have my liberty at my requirement. So when you look into this, what I feel is we have been totally moving in the bullock cart stage. We need to take up faster mode so that we can keep aligned with the international practices that are already there. The others are already protected. My constitution is also protecting me. Now it has been clarified by the Supreme Court that it is an inalienable right, as Meena Lal ji was telling. So let me get that protection. That's what I feel. And this is the constitutional development we can look in, because always the society and law should go in hand. As the society grows, as the society changes, the legal system should change. Otherwise, it becomes a wasteful exercise. With this, I think I have told the information which is required by you precisely so that even a common listener could understand, right? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. So we hear you say that due to rapidity in communication, that privacy has become important and it needs to be addressed. And that's where the constitutional aspiration needs to be fulfilled. Although the Article 21 that you refer to, there are various Supreme Court judgments which have ascended the surveillance or the privacy from one stage to the other. Originally, as we know, Supreme Court also said that, bodily people cannot be searched without a certain mandate of a regulation. Then the houses cannot be searched because unless there are certain procedures followed. So there are various judgments, and the canvas has been, painted very well by Supreme Court, all referring to Article 21, as Justice Sri Krishna also mentioned. So the latest one being, as you rightly touched upon, Justice Puttaswamy, the judgment in the case of Justice Puttaswamy. So Mr. Prakash, let me come to you now. In some of my sessions, I say that whenever a law is enacted on a new subject, it actually needs to be introspected by the society. That have we gone overboard, that it needed a regulation, why do we need a regulation which is coded? Because we as human beings, we are capable of regulating ourselves, but the situation has occurred that we needed a coded regulation. So as Mr. MGK has elucidated the need for a law of privacy, the pen met paper in India in 2005 when India wrote a separate privacy bill. However, the same could not be enacted, as we all know, in the form of a separate act. We all know that in India, the Information Technology Act was enacted in the year 2000. That is 17 years before Declaration of Privacy as a fundamental right. And as MG sir says, privacy is not a new concept. It's a very, very inherent concept. How has the IT Act looked at the concept of privacy? Does it contain any provision to assure privacy to the citizens of the country or foreigners or who come as visitors or on work visa or even set up businesses? Do you think that as per provisions in PDPB, the publicly available version, that is of PDPB, these provisions of IT Act will undergo a change, Mr. Prakash?
Yeah, thank you, Meena Lalji. So before I start the question, just a background or rather a reference to what Justice Sri Krishna mentioned. In fact, he was mentioning about law. He said that the law has to be proportionate to the objectives sought to be achieved. And so obviously that's the reason why, we had the IT Act only in 2000, much behind the other Western countries. And yes, I also agree with what MG sir said, having the law is one thing and implementing it is another thing. So that's of course, the administrative hassle or maybe the other overheads that we have which delay or the other interests. So that's with that background, of course, we got the IT Act in 2000. But at that stage, that act was only meant to grant legal recognition to, any electronic transactions that were done. And like, as you rightly mentioned, the privacy bill, which did not take off for some reason. In 2006, obviously, they came up, rather they mooted the amendment for the IT Act to insert this section 43A, which finally was called the 2008 amendment, although it actually came into effect from February 2009, where, body corporates were, asked to compensate for failing to protect data, etc. The definition of body corporate was given in that. I'm not going to the definition because that will take up a lot of time. They also defined, the reasonable security practices and procedures that need to happen, and also sensitive personal data. All these were, mentioned in the main act, but it was also said they had also amended, section 87(2) OB of the IT Act to say that the government could make rules for this. Now, this, as I mentioned, this act amendment came in 2009. And then it took another 2 years for them, 2011, to actually come up with the, sensitive personal data information rules, or SPDI rules, as they're known popularly as. And that's exactly the time when, personal information was defined, sensitive personal data was defined in those SPDI rules. So just to give an example, the sensitive personal data was defined as passwords, bank account details, credit debit card details, past present health records, sexual orientation, biometric data, etc., etc. And they also prescribed, penalties for both these things. So this was the first time that, we had, something called as, protection of personal information. And I still remember that in 2011, when these rules were enacted, including the IT companies, where in fact I also work with, all these companies, all the councils had a meeting on, what we should do, how we should work with HR, and how we should protect. Everybody was, there was some kind of awareness there, and some hustle bustle was there on how to be mindful about privacy, because end of the day, the corporate would be punished if there was any mishandling of data. Coming to the last piece of your question, which you had asked, of course, the PDPB, which will become PDPA in the present form as it is, if you look at, section 98 of the PDPB read with the schedule, they have clearly mentioned there that once, basically they have mentioned that if the PDPA is enacted, then this section 43A and section 87(2) OB, under which those SPDI rules were made, would actually be repealed. So which would mean that the single source of truth or single law for privacy would then be the PDPA as it would be passed at that stage. You're on mute, ma'am.
Okay, yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Prakash, for sharing those insights with us. Lord, I'm also mindful of the time. So therefore, let's do it up quickly. Lord Alfred Denning, in his book, What Next in the Law, said, the right to privacy in any event will necessarily have to go through a process of case-by-case development. Now, we have seen GDPR evolve in EU since its implementation in 2018. The ECJ and SCREM's judgment, we have at this forum of Gyanvardhini, we've discussed enough about it. My next question is to Dr. Limaye. Justice Sri Krishna spoke about how do you take consent in such variables as they exist in India? And he also spoke about consent fatigue. Are the provisions PDPB 2019 really a good match for global expectations or comparable with the laws of other countries? Now that we have seen GDPR and its implementation in 3 years, Dr. Limaye?
Yeah. Basically, Mr. Sri Krishna spoke about consent fatigue or consent-related issues. It was targeted that lot many loopholes are put into these particular consent-related questions, and due to that, people give consent blindly. So, informed consent was the one concept which he discussed or he elaborated, that if the consent is informed, then data principal would naturally go through the contents and then he will be deciding whether he should give the consent or not. But when it comes to lengthy agreements, lengthy documents, which is what we can see in all the social media sites or everywhere, so that would not amount to a true consent. So when the consent is required to be informed, or when the data principal is required to go through the each and every clause and then apply his mind and then decide whether he should opt for that particular consent, then that will be a reality. Because presently what happens, even if you don't want to give consent to certain clause, that provision is not available. Means subject to these conditions, I am accepting this particular. So it is my way or highway. You accept our entire policy or we refuse you to accept that particular app. Likewise. So here the consent is not in the favor of data principal. It is what is drafted by the companies. So when we come to the basic issue of consent, there has to be a lot of deliberations, how the consent should be framed and how informed consent should be framed. Then only we can get the concrete answer to what question you targeted towards me.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Limaye. Consent is indeed a very, very important aspect which has to evolve, as Lord Denning says, on a case-by-case implementation and application. Mr. Karan, you've been hearing the views, and we heard Mr. Srinivas also talk a lot about what is the future of privacy. Though legislation-wise, it may not be coded explicitly. From compliance point of view, which is a very important element in the mind of the industry, from a compliance point of view, a popular perception seems to be emerging that privacy would need to be driven by the IT. What are your views on this? And what would be your advice to the IT functions to live up to the perceptive expectation? Mr. Karan?
Yeah, so thank you, ma'am. Yes, you are right. Perceptions get built over a period of time. And some of the aspects known to us are that in today's digitized world, whenever you think data, you think of IT. So the Act also says privacy through data security. So, the data security has been leaning on IT for quite some time now. So although some may contest that data security is the responsibility of the business or everyone in the organization, but let's get practical. If we leave the businesses where IT is the business, most businesses don't even know what happens in IT. Obviously, whatever they may have expectation from the IT or maybe from the client's perspective, so definitely they may demand. But ultimately, even they don't know about what happens in IT. And then we are expecting such businesses to put in place mechanisms that will safeguard corporate and personal information. Seems far-fetched, isn't it? So I know for a fact that a lot of CIOs, including myself, have developed our understanding on various laws to help us understand the implications of law when we sign a document. So if you will ask me frankly, what I believe, it is now the responsibility of the CIOs, because you are asking from the present scenario. So I'm answering it from the present context. So this will be definitely the responsibility of the CIOs to explain to CFOs and obviously the legal team about the requirements stated on the contracts, whatever we sign, with our different clients, and we all will have to act together. But ultimately, it will become the responsibility of the CIOs. So, given this background, it does make it simpler for business to say, give it to IT and let them say what needs to be done. So my advice to IT functions to gear themselves is it is important to know what exactly needs to be known from a law perspective. I know I'm talking something like that, it becomes a little hazy. So quickly, let me summarize and put up, let me pose a few pointers that will help understand this. So if there is any data related disclosure that needs to be made, which act or statute should one refer? So, in my previous readings, I have found more than 15 plus laws and guidelines that prescribe the need to manage and maintain confidentiality and the disclosure of personal information. Mm-hmm. So, let's take a quick example. If you have installed a CCTV camera in your premises and there was a robbery in the adjacent building, which gets covered under your CCTV, and as per the investigating officer, if they seek or they demand the CCTV footage as a part of the investigation under several sections of CRPC, so it will become the responsibility of that company to provide that. But now most of the IT investments are on a shoestring budget, and where the management views IT as a cost. And then in that, such organizations will most likely respond saying that we have overwritten the footage since our storage limit permits us for 15 days or 30 days or whatever, whatever they mention in their policy. But this may be viewed differently. An instance of robbery in the adjacent building will certainly be known by you, as you are the neighbors, and there will be noise around the concurrence. So such knowledge put you in a position that you are aware what happened, and it is your responsibility to preserve the evidence. An inability to share the evidence can be viewed as a deliberate attempt to withhold evidence, obstructing the investigation process. And I should not say, but I'm telling you, you can be jailed just for this. So one may argue that we will contest in the court of the law and all these things, but the bottom line is, would you do all this at the cost of your time and energy while you are not entitled to do? You are there to do something else. So in my opinion, the role of IT is evolving, and it will need to gear up for the emerging challenges and compliance requirements. Obviously, I definitely would second to that. It's not only IT's role and to fulfill the requirements and become compliant. The whole company and the organization has to be part of the compliance initiative. Definitely, IT will have to play a larger role. And will need to be on the in the driver's seat and facilitate the orchestration within the company and the organization. But I would say some would be well equipped, but a majority of them will need to undergo a transformation. I don't have any. This is my personal views. I don't know. So I hope this answers your question.
Sure. Thank you very much. So I remember. In my career journey in Tata Steel, one of our superiors, because we legal people tend to talk a lot in the language which is more legal oriented, law oriented. So terminology is used slightly different. I won't say difficult, but different. So one of my senior colleagues told me, Meena, give me a note in English. Don't give me a note in legal. Give me a note in English. So that's what I hear you say, that a CIO, that is IT, has to learn to talk English to legal, for legal to understand and defend the non-compliances for the IT. So essentially, it's going to emerge like that. So I like that point that you have made. So Mr. Prakash, as Manoj says, data security has been leaning heavily on IT. When we talk of compliance, which is a very important limb of PDPB, the very obvious resultant question is, how are the penalties being addressed by the law presently in the bill form? Are the penalties at the turnover level reasonable? and whether a high penalty would really inspire compliance, because the objective of the law ought to be compliance and not penalizing. Also, the penalties could be in the grades of revenue penalties or monetary penalties, or they could be prosecution, offenses, conviction, etc. So what is your view on that?
Yeah, so thank you for asking that question. Under the present PDPB, we have penalty almost on the similar model as GDPR has. So let me first read out what's the GDPR penalty. With GDPR penalty, of course, it's in two categories. One is 20 million euros or 4% of the annual global turnover. And for certain offenses, it is 10 million or 2% of the annual global turnover. So the word used there is annual global turnover, which means the entire operations across the world of that particular company would be counted, and then the penalty would be given. Now, these are all upper limits that also we need to understand. So when we come to PDPB, what it says is they have also categorized it into two categories. One is penalties for failure to or rather take care of the data, and the other is of course failure to conduct data audit. The more serious one is obviously breach of data, etc. So for that it's 15 crores or 4% of the annual turnover of the data fiduciary. So that's the difference. And the second level is 5 crore or 2% of the annual turnover of the fiduciary. So in GDPR, while we have annual global turnover, in India, the present law says annual turnover of the fiduciary. Now, I also heard, Navi sir in his opening comments, talking about, various, changes which are likely to come or which have been proposed rather, in which there is one set of people who are even saying to remove this, annual turnover piece and, put it into some fixed amount. So, it is very difficult to say, what is right or what is wrong in the context of whether, having the annual turnover as a benchmark is right or not. Because honestly, if you have the annual turnover as a piece, the large companies, like we heard again, Navi sir was quoting this example of Amazon, Luxembourg, small country, the fine was per capita of almost 1 lakh per individual or something, 746 million euros. WhatsApp case to honestly it might only pinch them at in a very small area, all these big companies. But when you look at the Indian perspective, I'm just debating, I don't know what went in the background because obviously none of us were part of the discussions. But why they could have made it data fiduciary and not the global turnover is basically, we have a lot of small Indian companies, and they possibly wanted it to be sort of wanted to go a little lenient, and maybe for all when the final act comes out, they might possibly even remove this annual turnover piece. But all said and done, my personal view is it is always better to have a higher limit, because the penalty is all upper limit actually. It does not mean that the judge has to pass a 15 crore penalty or a 20 million euro penalty. End of the day, the judge has to pass this penalty, judge or the adjudicating officer, whoever is there, has to pass this based on the gravity of the situation. What are the equitable principles? How, what are the, sort of checks and balances that have been there, taking everything into consideration. And obviously when they do all this, they also consider the potential of the company, to sort of, regulate themselves or maintain the stuff and all that, and then they would pass. So having an upper limit like what GDPR done, in my view, is always good, because then at least you have a heavy hand to hit companies who are violating, willfully, and at the same time you could always go leniently. That's my, personal take on this. And then coming back to but there are people who are telling, why percentage of fine, etc. Yes, percentage of fine was never there written in law, but then we do have precedents in India itself. When this Google case was there and CCI was adjudicating, but finally CCI asked Google, please produce your last 5 years turnover. And then they said, 5% of that turnover is about 135 crores or so, and that is what they had penalized Google. And their concept at that time was, we only want to penalize what they have earned out of India operations, because the complaint was against India operations and how they were, sort of, manipulating the way they were doing business here. So, and that is there written in the judgment also, all those 5 years, revenue of Google, and it's the calculation of penalty written there. So we do have a precedence on, even though it was not written in law. So my personal view, if you ask me, is there should be a percentage, and the upper limit, like what GDPR has prescribed, is what is more fair, is what I feel. Thank you.
So very, very strict advocate here, Prakash. So, but then I like the concept that you mentioned, that there has to be a proper adjudication before the highest penalty could be met out to anybody who's targeted with any breach of non-compliance. So friends, Dr. Jeffrey Skopek, a legal scholar, he argues that privacy and anonymity are flip sides of each other. We heard Srinivas also speak something about anonymity. He says, Dr. Jeffrey says that they are distinct but connected. He advocates that anonymity and privacy exist on opposite sides of the wall that is created by splitting a person's information about the person. If post-split, we know a person's identity, but not the information, we describe the condition as privacy. Whereas if we know the information, but not the person's identity, we describe the condition as anonymity. For example, let me not go into examples because, Justice Sri Krishna also gave an example. On the other hand, the state may assert a legitimate interest as Section 35 of the PDPB is trying to create a provision for exempting the government organizations. So on the other hand, the state may assert a legitimate interest in analyzing data born from hospital records to, for example, to understand and deal with public health academic to obviate a serious state concern. Dr. Limaye, on 27th October this year, the Supreme Court passed an order in the infamous Pegasus spyware issue. I'm sure many of us would have read it. Pegasus spyware issue and constituted an independent technical committee, which will be overseen by Justice R.V. Ravindran, another former judge, Supreme Court of India. There are experts on this committee from IPS, ISO, etc., who are playing a role, who are members of the committee. However, in a statement reported on 12th November, soon after the order of the Supreme Court, Mr. P.P. Chaudhary, the new chairman of the JPC, on Data Protection Bill, said on the controversial Section 35, which grants government, as I said, wide-ranging powers, that accessing citizens' data, and there are enough safeguards which have been built into the legislation, and therefore accessing citizen data by the state is not unwarranted or illegal. And he also said that the right balance between countries' need for security and integrity and sovereignty must be provided. How do you view the scope of Section 35 of PDPB?
Yeah, so the question targeted is related to the provision of government, where the provision says that government can access that particular data in certain interest with proper following due procedure of law. So what we understand due procedure of law is either proper notice is given, consent is obtained, or whatever are the procedures mandated for getting that particular information. When we say, or when we go through Information Technology Act also, a lot of hue and cry was there. When recently, or say 1 year ago, government notified certain agencies to carry out these sort of activities. So that provision specifically says that government agencies will also follow due process of law, and then and thereafter only government can surveil or take that particular information. So when it comes to national interest or when it comes to legitimate interest, and ultimately what we have to see, government is by primary definition of the people, for the people, by the people. So when government is for the people, if it is for the betterment of the people, the government chosen by us or elected by the people wants to do something, and that is also documented, then I don't think that this amounts to high-handedness of the government. Yes, there can be different views about how government will handle that particular law, or how the person sitting behind that particular handle. So this is typical case of whether there should be speed governor to the vehicles, because it is in the hands of driver to exceed that particular limit depending upon the circumstances. So as far as Section 35 is concerned, the government, and I am in firm view of that, government should have this particular power or exemption in certain cases. But due procedure of law, what we as a lawyer always point out, due procedure of law must be followed. There should not be high-handedness, because ultimately what happens, even any action of the government can be challenged by we lawyers before the court that due procedure of law was not followed. So it amounts to the person-to-person understanding whether that is procedure is due process of law. So these words cannot be described either by you or me or the makers of the law, but reasonable restrictions, what we follow in section 43A, that is reasonable restrictions, reasonable guidelines. So similarly, due process of law must be there for allowing section 35. And when it comes to national interest and seeing the trend or the fragile fabric of India, this provision is must, and I fully support this particular provision as an individual. So in my views, there has to be certain due process which can be documented, which can get amendment on every passing day, but there has to be provision of section 35 in the whatever form of PDPB we are expecting.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Limaye, for those insightful views. Due process of law is very much a backbone of Article 21 of the Constitution of India. And every citizen has a right to due process who's undergoing a proceeding. And that's why Dr. Limaye is emphasizing on due process of law. So Manoj, let's hear from you something more on personal data protection law and the speed with which the enactment is happening or yet taking time. As we heard Mr. Kodandaram say that the rapidity with which communication is happening, the same rapidity is not existing in lawmaking. And it took, as Prakash also said, it took 2 years after the amendment of the IT Act for the rules to come in. So Justice Sri Krishna mentioned with emphasis that you really cannot compel the government to enact the personal data protection law at the earliest. Do you think India has realized the need for privacy quite late in the day compared to other countries? How do you think that compliance of privacy laws could be achieved? Alternately, once PDPA is notified, will it stir up a lot of compliance requirements? Manoj?
Yes, I think it's a great question. And so let me put it in this way. While I'm not saying maybe the opinion of the panel or any members who have really expertise on this particular domain, but yes, while the common belief is that we do not have laws that address privacy aspects, and those who think that way might be right to a fair extent, but my views are slightly different. We heard the previous speakers mention that due to certain events in 2017, the Indian Supreme Court held that Indian citizens have a fundamental right to privacy, and which is guaranteed primarily under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. So, as I mentioned earlier, there are at least 15 plus laws and guidelines before IT Act was notified, and that prescribe the need to manage and maintain confidentiality and disclosure of personal information. Obviously, we do not have enough time so that I can get into all those in detail, but just for the sake of example, so if we consider public financial institutions obligations as to Fidelity and Secrecy Act 1983, whether we take Payment and Settlement Systems Act 2007, under this act, the Reserve Bank of India is empowered to act as an overseeing authority for regulation and supervision, because this is a kind of a sectoral law. So I will just give you a kind of a quick brief, the overseeing authority as a RBI overseeing authority for regulation and supervision of payment systems in India. Many of us might have spoken, or maybe we will speak about the data localizations also. The RBI is prohibited from disclosing the existence or contents of any document or any part of any information given to it by a system participant. Similarly, if we get into Credit Information Companies Regulation Act 2005, or if we discuss the Credit Information Companies Regulation Act 2006, So all these legislation is essentially aimed at regulation of sharing and exchanging credit information by credit agencies with the third parties. Moving away, and if whether we consider section 74 of the juvenile justice, which talks about care and protection of children Act 2015. Again, if I come back to health and medical privacy under the Indian Medical Council Professional Conduct, Etiquette and Ethics Regulations 2002. So physicians are obliged to protect the confidentiality of patients during all stages of procedures, including information relating to their personal and domestic lives, unless the law mandates otherwise, or there is a serious and identifiable risk to a specific person or community of a notifiable disease. So, all these acts and regulations mention that the processor or service provider has to hold the information of the data subject confidential and not disclose it to anyone except law enforcement agencies or the regulator. There are others also in similar thought where they restrict disclosure or direct the safekeeping of personal information and that it collects or receives. So I would say our legal machinery has considered privacy requirements in a fragmented approach. Rather, I may say it doesn't exist. I will say it is in a fragmented approach where sectoral laws have played the role of bringing these aspects. Yes, it is equally important, and let's discuss that as well, and the challenges part. So by giving a quick example, under Indian Telegraph Act allows the state to intercept communications after obtaining appropriate authorization, but none of the laws speak of such snooping activity done by non-state actors. So, the IT rules provide reasonable security practices to follow and statutory security procedures for corporate entities that collect, handle, and process data. And these also apply to the use of big data, but there are no specific guidelines exist for this. Just now we discussed about section 43A of the IT Act, which discuss about the workplace privacy. So in the present scenario, employers are required to adopt security practices to protect sensitive personal data of employees in their position. So there are different retention requirements, prescribed by sectoral laws. Some use the term retain at least for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, whatever it is, and while some mention the destruction after specific years. So, in medical termination of Pregnancy Act 1971, this has been clearly explained that the hospital will have to destroy the information after 5 years from the date of final entry of the, this particular surgery happened. So now suppose there is a court case, that is going on for which this is an evidence, what should the hospital do? So if you look at it, although we spoke only about a few requirements of certain laws, and that too on a cursory level, as an organization, if you don't understand the applicability of all, and rightly so, it does appear confusing and will seem like a daunting task to remain compliant. So the questions that will arise are, will the coming of PDPA that in concurrence with the constitutional rights provide the masses the mechanisms to exercise their rights as data subject and prevent their data whether being shared, disclosed or processed by various agencies and bodies such that it causes hindrances in their current way of working or providing services? So, hence all these sectoral laws and not only IT Act will have to be aligned to the framework set by PDPA.
Sure.
So, in one of the discussion I was having, an interesting point that came up was if there is a conflicting view between sectoral laws and requirements of PDPA, which one to follow. So, while one school of thought was that sectoral laws should be given preference such they have been drafted by respective industry experts who understand the sector better than those who had a wider vision while framing PDPA. But unless these other laws in sync with PDPA, the conflicting situations will give rise a lot of non-compliances, and uniformity of implementing the law, will not be achieved. So this is all my views. I hope
Sure.
I answer your questions. Few of the questions which I am also looking for answers, so I will have to wait and watch.
That's interesting. Each one of us, and I think you rightly said it, that our legal system has considered privacy in a fragmented manner. So that's where it is. Lawyers are looking for their own answers. Technologists are looking, CIOs are looking for their own answers. So we are all looking for some answers. And ultimately, we will have to speak to one another in a converged manner. So very interesting perspectives. Thank you, Manoj, brought by you on sectoral aspects, which will also create some stir in industries with regard to issues with regard to compliance. There can be issues which are sectorally different, compliances which could be different sectorally. And thank you for the insights on that. So friends, we started our discussion with Constitution of India, and where I called upon Mr. Kodandaram to share his experience journey in his career of having read some celebrated judgments where the Supreme Court has sat down to interpret the Constitution. And we have also spoken a lot to do with sectoral laws. Also, we've spoken about constitutional aspirations. Also, we've heard that fundamental rights are not absolute rights. We also heard that there can be reasonable restrictions imposed on fundamental rights. So these are various aspects which emerge out of Constitution of India and call for interpretation. But there is one important aspect that we bring to you straight away, and that's my next question to Mr. Kodandaram. So while we're talking of the right to privacy being a fundamental right, but we have seen that there have been several judgments of the Supreme Court in which the court has expounded the law that the citizens also have a right to information, right? After several judgments of Supreme Court and after several activists had played their role, the government has also covered the precious right to information, the right to information under the RTI Act in 2005. Could we have your views on, would there be an overlap between the two important rights which could create conflict, and what can be done to ensure that Personal Data Protection Bill preserves the right to information also with a very fine balance? Your views, sir.
Yeah, Meena Lalji, very good question. I loved this question because this was the question asked to me in many seminars. They said, sir, are they not conflicting? In one place you say you give the information, in the other place say, no, I will not give. Then I explained to them, RTI Act, no doubt, is a practical regime to give effect to the Article 19 of our Constitution, 19 to reasonable restrictions. Because government authorities will not reply to you. They will take their own time, and they said, we require a practical time frame, and hence there. But kindly look in. There, in PDPP bill, we talk about fiduciary, which is a large volume of people, consisting of unregulated people, more of them, right? But where we talk about governmental authorities who are having that data from whom citizen can seek information is only government and its related agencies. So it's a smaller one. Let us keep that aside. The second aspect is the RTI Act itself under section 8(1)(j bars the personal information which interacts with the privacy can be shared. But one slight problem is that in government things, no doubt personal information cannot be given. But under section 11, third party, the person concerned can be interviewed, and whether it can be given or not can be taken decision. And personal information term is not defined. Personal is something which engrosses the privacy of the people, as explained by many cases in the Supreme Court. So when we look in only in small differences, in data law, PDPB bill, we go from the data and we say it should not be identifiable to the person. But in RTI Act, what happens? We know the person, we are seeking information about the person. So there, identification, removing, and what you said, some new terminologies you're using, anonymizing is not at all the concept that could be borrowed. It is impossible because it is the other way. Second aspect is when third party has the liberty to deny, even the chief, central commission can look into the larger public interest. So there it is, equanimity is message. So there is no conflict, gentlemen. That's what I told the person who asked me the question. Both of them are there. Both of them are fundamental rights. Both of them are equally treated under the law. Privacy of an individual is paramount. And if you want to know information about the personal person, about in the government information, in the government agencies, you should have some reasonable aspects, public interest. If you can prove that there's a public interest, it can be allowed. Even that is available in PDPB bill. So there is absolutely no conflict as assumed by many. There, in fact, one supports the other. One encourages the other. Yes, personal information, long time ago, Supreme Courts in many of cases have said privacy is not to be given in the governmental RTI Act also. The recent one where Supreme Court, whether it is covered under RTI Act, I think the case law is Central Public Information Officer of Supreme Court, where it came, the conflict between Puttaswamy as well as RTI Act has been clearly defined. They have said, as long as this privacy is there, we cannot give. Secondly, most important is the protection of privacy of the individual. If there is public interest, it can be shared, even plenty of judgments. Even earlier to Puttaswamy, a lot of judgments are there in RTI Act. I think that to name a few, the case laws, which I always forget, I don't know, that is technology, in some this case laws, I'll say, cite it by tomorrow because I am a very poor memory. So now the thing is very, very clear. There is no conflict between RTI Act as well as PDPB Act, but there is certain changes to be made to remove ambiguity. There is no terminology fiduciary explained, but in PDPB, even a DPA is also a fiduciary. That is section 49(3) clearly says he is also bound by, and therefore all government authorities also are getting covered. The second aspect is information, personal information and sensitive personal information. These two definitions, in addition to fiduciary, to be borrowed and made applicable to RTI Act by an amendment, then both of them are serving the same objective aspired by the citizen in the Constitution. So they are not conflicting rights, they are supporting rights. Individual is more important. It is individual's reputation is more important, not the money, not the commercial interest which the data people are speaking all the time. It is not the commercial protection that is required for a girl or a man or a boy or a girl. It is the interest of his reputation and his way. He wants to live in whatever fashion he wants without disturbing others. We should allow that to come. That's the real freedom. Sarva Tantra Swatantra. That is the terminology used millions and millions of years ago. Like a bird, I should be allowed to be freely there. So that's the take on that. There is no conflict between RTI Act and our. I think I have answered you, ma'am.
Sure. Thank you very much, sir. I think that clears a lot of doubt in the mind of some of the participants here that whether there is really a conflict between two laws enacted by the same government, that is central government. So as you clearly articulated, there is no conflict between RTI Act and PDPB once it becomes an enactment or existing RTI Act framework, and the two will continue to coexist. If at all there is a dispute with regard to non-sharing of personal information of anybody and the matters reach the court, obviously the courts will have to put the correct understanding in a judgment also. Friends, the discussion is a journey of evolution, and any journey, if paused, indicates just fatigue. But we have to be mindful of the time. So we promise that this is a pause to the conversations, and we shall continue to evolve in thought, in writing, in developing conversations. I take the opportunity to thank our esteemed panelists, Mr. M.G. Kodandaram, Dr. Mahendra Limaye, Wing Commander S.K. Prakash, and Mr. Manoj Karp for the wonderful inputs and insights that they shared with us. Thank you all, and good night. Everybody have a great evening ahead. Thank you.